Cool. Kick us off, Josh. I got a ton of questions.
Hello, camera. What's up, guys? This is Josh coming to you from the Affiliate Marketing Show. That was terrible. That wasn't even my normal thing.
Wanna make that paper, wanna make that now. This is the Affiliate Marketing Show. Wanna make that paper, wanna make that now.
What's up, everybody? This is Josh with another episode of the Affiliate Marketing Show. Please be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to stay up to date on all the latest affiliate marketing news, tips, and trends. Josh from OfferVault.com, the industry's largest aggregator of all things affiliate marketing. We have, per usual, Mr. Paper Call Adam Young, the industry legend Harrison Gevirtz, and the czar coming back for a three-peat, the founder of Troutman Amin LLP, as well as TCPA and the organization Reach. What is up, Eric the czar? How are we doing today? Thanks for coming back.
Big day. Happy to be here, guys.
Yeah, according to your article on TCPA World, it is done. FCC closes, quote, lead generator loophole. And if I scroll down here, this is my favorite part of the article. Many issues here. So can you please just kick us off with an umbrella overview of kind of what went down today? Has anything changed since 2 weeks ago when we had you on the show? And I know Adam and Harrison got a boatload of questions, but why don't you let us know, like, in your opinion, kind of like how the industry changed today?
Yeah, so today, December 13th, 2023, was the FCC December open meeting. The 5 commissioners of the FCC got together and formally voted to approve 4-1 the new NPRM rule that was requiring 1-to-1 consent in all of your third-party and first-party lead generation efforts, which is wild. A lot of first-party issues here as well. It's not just third-party. Additionally, all calls now have to be logically and topically related to the, quote, transaction, whatever that means, that led to the consent that the consumer has provided. This is not a change from 2 weeks ago when we talked through. It was a proposed rule at that time. I told you, breaking news, it's going to pass. No surprise, it passed. There were apparently some edits that have been made. We have not seen those edits yet. They are expected to be very small edits. The core of the rule was adopted and remains. Those edits, whatever they are, will be available when the rule is published in the Federal Registrar, which we will circulate on TCPAworld.com as soon as that takes place, probably in about 30 days.
Quick question here, 4-1. Do we know who the one is? Are they like in the industry kind of, or like why the one vote against?
Yeah, so the one vote against was by Republican Commissioner Nathan Symington, who, in my opinion, is a national hero today. He had some just blistering comments for the FCC, correctly called them out for some bait and switch tactics where they suggested one thing was going to happen, and then everyone said that I was wrong because the FCC kind of tricked everyone into thinking I was wrong, but of course I was right, and then switched over to do exactly what I told you they were going to do. Commissioner Symington basically said that was garbage. You shouldn't have done that. You should have done a second NPRM, gone back, actually showed the real rule. They hid it. They kept it hidden in their cloaks. They should have showed the real rule to the American businesses so they could have really built a record and really heard from more people. And they didn't do it. And Commissioner Symington said, look, this is going to break the backs, it's a quote, break the backs of small businesses in this country. And it shouldn't have gone down like this. So I thought he was fabulous. I loved his remarks. Unfortunately, he was just one guy. The other 4 commissioners, including the other Republican commissioner, very disappointed in Commissioner Carr, who I actually have a great deal of respect for, but very disappointing that he voted in favor of this rule. Although again, he did require some edits, so we have to see what those edits are. But it was 4-1, 3 Democrats, 1 Republican supporting the rule.
So I think the small business topic is really interesting, and maybe we'll dive into that another day. But I think the meat and potatoes for our industry is the closure of the lead generation loophole and how it's going to affect marketers going forward. And so earlier today, I had a conversation in a public Skype group about this, and there were a few questions from the people in it who are engaged in the lead generation industry. And I wanted to touch on a few of those. But before we dive in, I have a list of potential business types that are operating in the lead gen industry today. And I basically would love to hear your thoughts on whether or not you think these types of businesses will survive going forward. And so the first one is age data sales with TCPA consent.
Dead. Totally dead.
Dead.
Yeah.
Lead brokering via ping post.
Likely dead in most of its manifestations. A pre-ping environment could exist. Brokering, though, generally is going to get wiped out because now it's just one-to-one. The consumer has to agree to a specific brand entity, really, before the consent is valid to begin with.
Okay. What about selling data to multiple parties?
Selling data
for multiple parties for them to call.
It cannot be done unless the lead seller has obtained one-to-one consent for every one of those parties individually.
Got it. And you can no longer sell data to anyone who isn't the actual end seller of the services, right? So brokering of TCPA consent is, where's that going to go?
There I disagree with you. The seller, right? The ultimate, so we have to disambiguate, because people hear seller, they think lead seller. No, never again. Okay. When I say seller, I'm talking about actually the end lead buyer, the good or service provider who's going to provide a good or service to the consumer. That is the seller that the FCC is talking about. And we'll pick on Wells Fargo to just give you a very specific example, right? Wells Fargo is going to be providing, let's say this example, the lending service. Wells Fargo's name has to be on the form. Now, if you are Bob living in your parents' basement and you've got that cool finance blog that people go to and you generate a lead, right, on your finance blog for Wells Fargo, you probably don't have a relationship directly with Wells Fargo, but you might have a relationship with a network, and that network, these aggregators might have that relationship with Wells Fargo. So there can still be a middleman, right? Bob can still sell his data not directly to Wells Fargo because he doesn't have that relationship. He can still sell it to that network. That network then can sell it to Wells Fargo, and it can even charge a fee, right, to Wells Fargo. Maybe he bought it from Bob for $10, and it's going to sell it to Wells Fargo for $50. That's fine, right? That is still allowed. But Wells Fargo is the only one that can buy that lead. Nobody else can buy that lead but Wells Fargo. So that's going to be your new reality here.
And consumers have to affirmatively consent to Wells Fargo contacting them, right? Like Wells Fargo is literally going to have to be listed on the consent form.
Not just listed, but individually selected by the consumer. That is correct.
Interesting. Okay. And so another question I received about this is related to warm transfers. And I think there's some ambiguity around that. And so I'll just read the question exactly. I'd love to hear Eric talk more about why he thinks transfers to people you don't have one-to-one consent for wouldn't be compliant.
I feel like it's all right there in the question. It's one of those questions that answers itself, isn't it?
Well, let's unpack it then. So let's talk about this related to warm transfers, because I think the thought process is I'll just make my own brand that's Lead Heroes or whatever it is, and a consumer gives me consent to call them. I have my consent call center call that consumer, and then transfer the live call after I've got the consumer on the phone to Wells Fargo. And so why is that allowed or not allowed, or what are the nuances around that relationship now?
Right. So definitely not allowed. And so let's back into it, right? So what is allowed, I think it's easier to start with what is allowed, right? Wells Fargo's name is on the form. The data is going to ultimately be Wells Fargo's, right? That lead is going to Wells Fargo. But Wells Fargo can have a relationship with a call center or a BPO to call that lead on its behalf, right? So maybe instead of the lead going directly to Wells Fargo, it first goes to BPO X, right? Who calls that lead on behalf of Wells Fargo. That's totally fine. Even if that BPO is not named on the disclosure, it doesn't matter. Only Wells Fargo has to be named on the disclosure, and the consumer is going to receive calls from a third party on behalf of Wells Fargo. Totally valid. And that company can then warm transfer to Wells Fargo on the basis of that lead, totally fine, right? That is perfectly okay. What's not okay, right, is where there's the brand, right, lead generator X, who puts lead generator X on the form, right? The consumer receives a call from lead generator X, and the lead generator X says, "Hey, would you like to hear from Wells Fargo? I can connect you right now." And then the consumer says, "Yeah, that sounds great," and then transfers, right? The reason why that's not okay is that lead generator X is not the seller. I know that's confusing because you're like, no, but I'm selling my lead to Wells Fargo, so I'm the seller. No, you are not the seller, right? This is the confusing nomenclature problem that this ruling is creating. The seller for this purpose is Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo's name has to be on that form. Lead generator X is not the seller. They're a nobody in the FCC's eyes. It's so mean to say, but like literally, they don't exist in the context of this ruling. They have to be, they can never get consent basically for the call that they want to make here. And it's something actually that another client of mine raised, which I thought was really fascinating, is the net effect of this is to completely to silence marketers who act on behalf of multiple brands. It allows marketers who act on behalf of one brand to carry on, as I just told you, the BPO on behalf of Wells Fargo. But if you're trying to market on behalf of multiple brands simultaneously to create that lead and sell it off, dead. That model is dead.
So would this also apply if, and let me give you a different scenario, lead generator X puts their own name on the form and gets someone on the phone, transfers them to Wells Fargo, but does not give Wells Fargo the consent to call the consumer. So like Wells Fargo never will reach out to that consumer again. It just so happens that lead generator X got them on the phone and qualified them for Wells Fargo's products and services.
Right. The problem is that the original outbound call is illegal. And the original outbound call is illegal because Wells Fargo was not on the form, and the intent and purpose of the call was to generate the lead and transfer it to Wells Fargo. So it's not that Wells Fargo's subsequent calls are illegal. They would also be illegal. The problem from Wells Fargo's perspective is that original call is illegal. And if Wells Fargo buys that lead, guess who's going to get sued? Wells Fargo. And that's exactly the scenario we see today at a lower scale in certain circumstances where the lead buyer is not actually on the form the way they're supposed to be. We see even today, right, these lead buyers getting sued in this scenario. In the future, where the one-to-one consent rules aren't being followed, we can anticipate brands are going to get sued left, right, and center if they accept warm transfers.
So then we're saying basically that you can collect the consumer's consent. The consumer knows who lead generator X is. They've consented to lead generator X calling them, but just because the fact that lead generator X doesn't sell a product or service to that consumer, the consent is invalid and it's effectively an illegal call.
Correct.
Wow. That's crazy. Like that to me seems a little overbearing, simply because if the consumer consented to hear from somebody, then there should be no reason why they can't have a conversation. But that's pretty intense. Okay. It's kind of a mind-blowing thing for me. And so the main workaround that people are talking about right now is you collect consumers' data in a form, and then for people that are selling it to multiple brands, you ping out to those multiple brands and then select a winner, and then display that winner's consent, or maybe the top two or whatever it is, on the landing page. And then the consumer then must click and affirmatively consent. So hit a checkbox or switcher or something of that nature. That's a standard modal of affirmative consent for a consumer, and then submit that consent. And then that lead can be sold to one or multiple parties if the consumer consents to it.
You got it. That is correct.
Is there a limit?
That's the pre-ping, what they're calling the pre-ping model now. Yeah.
Right. Which Harrison and I have talked about this, and as media buyers is likely going to have a drastic effect on conversion rate, because getting someone to fill out a form is one thing, but then having them also give their consent after filling out the form is going to hamper user experience. And then the more people you put in that selection,
as a consumer, it feels annoying and limiting to options.
Yeah, I don't think it's a great consumer experience. I also think for the marketer, it's going to have a very big effect on marketing budgets and conversion rate and the amount of money they can actually get per lead. Also, I had a phone call with a good friend and business associate of ours, and he basically said that it's really going to be a problem for his business because he has contracts with buyers that allow them to return leads. And so if you only put the highest bidder, the top two bidders on the consent page, a consumer consents, you send the lead to the buyer and they return it. Now you can't resell the lead. You can't sell it to anybody else. You can't monetize it in any way, shape, or form that includes a robocall, an outbound dial, or a text message. Do I have all that correct, Czar?
You have it all correct. Now there's an opportunity here because I always want to temper bad news with good wherever I can, which is it feels to me like there's going to be a whole new market dynamic, right? Because this pre-ping is from a certain perspective an opportunity. When you are bidding on the pre-ping, you are no longer bidding on the certainty that someone has provided express written consent. You're bidding on the opportunity, the potential that that consumer will complete the form and actually click that button, right? So one, the price ironically seems like it's going to be lower because it's not certain that you're ever going to get express written consent. So that's kind of one interesting little nuance to this. The second, which I was talking to Mike Ferree about earlier today, is it seems to me that there's an opportunity because even if you can't sell this as express written consent, this is still a pretty advanced intent trigger here, right? The consumer is live on a form filling things out. So you might not be able to sell it in a ping post auction model the way you could before, but you could still sell the fact that the consumer filled out this information and is in the market to multiple people, right? This ruling does not impact that. Now you have to have privacy policies and everything on the front end from a privacy standpoint, but from an express written consent standpoint, as long as no one's calling on that lead, right, you can still use that as an intent trigger, and people will still pay for that. So there might be ways to monetize this in real time beyond just selling express written consent. So it's not as if I don't know. I think there's still value to leads even if you can't get the express written consent that you might require otherwise.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the one thing though that's interesting about intent data is it is almost worthless comparatively to the TCPA consent to outbound dial a lead as they're traded today. I mean, you're not going to get $18 for consent data or intent data. You might get 4 cents if you're.
I was going to say you might get 3 cents. You might get
penny
a couple dollars for
scale,
a few thousand. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And then you would need a significant volume of intent data to even ink a deal to sell it. And so it's an interesting opportunity for massive lead generators to look at that as ancillary revenue. But to your point on a pre-ping, lead prices for buyers will likely come down because they're not bidding. They're not bidding on the data. They're bidding on the opportunity to collect consent. And so what I think is likely from a media buyer standpoint is my bid prices are going to go down. My media costs are going to go up. My conversion rates are going to go down. And I might as well just promote pay-per-call.
I mean, I don't know how to conclude from like a business strategy standpoint. I mean, I think different folks are going to land in a different place there, but you're probably right. All I can tell you is from a legal perspective, thou shalt not generate leads the way you used to. It's kind of.
I have a question for you then. We are aware of what the fines and penalties are, the litigation, when they come after someone for a TCPA violation. What are the penalties now? Are those the same in terms of the $1,000 or whatever per call, or is it changing?
Yeah, no, so it's staying exactly the same, right? So that's something to kind of understand, like what's the practical impact of this in the real world, right? So today, if you make an outbound call on an illegal lead, which happens today too, it's $500 per call up to $1,500. You can be sued in a class action, and so it's not just to the one person that you called, right? You get these litigator trolls; they want $4,000. That is one issue, but the larger issue, of course, which is why me and my team exist, is to defend the big, massive class actions that are, billions of dollars at stake and can put anybody out of business, and that's why we exist. So that's today, and when the new ruling comes into play, it's the same thing, right? The same exact risks in terms of class litigation, billions of dollars in exposure, $500 per call. That's all the same. The difference is today you can defend yourself by saying, I obtained this lead from such and such website. here it is. I'm on the partner list. I win the case, right? Sometimes. In the future, that's not going to happen anymore. That same lead that you just had, that you defended yourself on today, you're not going to be able to use that lead effectively as consent. It's going to be invalid according to the FCC, and the court's are going to have to agree with the FCC and say that's not a valid consent. Instead, the new consent has to have the seller's specific, right, picking on Wells Fargo again, Wells Fargo's name, not just on the form, but individually selected by that consumer. Otherwise, that express written consent is not going to be valid. So that's the change.
So if I'm a lead generator then, and then I completely ignore these rules and I'm like, YOLO, I'm going to just continue driving calls into my center. We're going to do warm transfers. I'm going to sell these calls. What do you think the exposure multiple is from pre-ruling to post-ruling? Because some people are not going to follow the rules anyways, right? But like if I'm that guy who's not following the rules, how much bigger is the exposure pre versus post?
Infinite.
Post versus pre. Infinite.
Well, previously it was 0 and now it's unlimited. So because if you're following the rules today and you're doing the right thing today, then in theory, your exposure is 0. Now, there's always trolls, there's always, cost of doing business. But if you're doing it right, in theory, your exposure is 0. You do the same exact thing September 2nd, 2024, wherever this ruling becomes effective, you've gone from 0 exposure to unlimited exposure of $500 per call. So it's an infinite increase. And then however many calls you're making, it times 500. Now, that is if you're using regulated technology. We could, take a breath and recognize that as big as this ruling is, there is this big giant loophole probably that the commission just created, which is ironic because they created a ruling to close a loophole, but they actually opened a loophole in doing so. And the loophole that they opened up is this ruling does not apply to phone calls that are made manually. And by manually, I mean really manually using a human selection system, not like preview mode or something stupid like that or clicked it out. I mean, like you pick up your phone and you call, or you're using a human selection system. This modification only applies to regulated technology under the TCPA, which includes your pre-recorded voices, your AI outbounding, and any of your automated telephone dialing systems, which, it's still fairly broad even after Facebook. So something to keep in mind. If you are dialing purely manually, then that same scenario you just gave me, right? That same call center relying on the same, let's say there's an owned and operated lead. It complies with the Troutman 9. It's got all the right things. The only thing is it is not complying with the new 1-to-1. You can still use that same consent, call manually, not scrub the DNC, and you're still okay, probably, right? And there's always these asterisks, right? I always have to be like, probably. And the reason that this is probably is the FCC did not modify the existing rule, right? So understand, I guess I should say at a high level, there are 2 different kinds of consent that are relevant under the TCPA. There's the prior express written consent, which you have to have anytime you're making a marketing call using regulated technology. That is what the FCC has changed. There's another definition, which is express invitation or permission, which sounds similar to express written consent, but is actually different. And that is the consent that you need when you're calling the DNC numbers. Now, the reason that nobody talks about these differences is because the courts thought that they were the same before. But now the FCC has said, no, they're different. Under the express written consent to use regulated technology, you have to have 1-to-1 consent. Under prior express invitation or permission to contact numbers on the DNC, the old rule applies. Now, what is the old rule? We all think we know what the old rule is. Which is, the environment that we currently live in. They have to be on the partner list, but so long as they're on the partner list, you can still sell the lead, right, to the marketing partner. Now, there's an organization called the National Consumer Law Center, which is one of these think tanks, right, one of these big public, special interest groups. And they've told the FCC, and they've got 28 state AGs that have now agreed with them, that they believe that the definition of prior express invitation or permission has always required 1-to-1 direct consent between the consumer and the seller of the good or service. In other words, in their mind, what the FCC just did to express written consent has always been the rule for numbers on the DNC. Now, I disagree with that, but it's a big question mark, right, that the courts are going to have to answer. Can you sell consent? Could you ever sell consent to call a number on the DNC? We all believe the answer is yes, right? The MCLC is saying the answer has always been no. Once the courts rule on that, we will either know that we have a big loophole where you can continue to call numbers using the old leads, or everybody's in a lot of trouble because every call that's been made over the last 4 years to a number on the DNC has always been illegal, which I can't believe that that's true, but that's something that people are going to have to look at. That's going to be an issue before the courts.
Now, does this only apply to B2C or does it apply to B2B as well?
It applies to any number. So on what the FCC has done, remember, express written consent looks at regulated technology, and that applies to any call made to a cellular phone, B2B or B2C, any cellular phone, and any pre-recorded call to a landline for marketing purposes as well. Again, B2B or B2C, doesn't matter.
Got it. And okay. And so I think it's always been this way where like I physically can pick up my phone and call you and try to sell you something just by entering your number into my phone, cell phone to cell phone. That completely doesn't apply. But essentially any mainstream call center that's using any sort of dialer technology really needs to take a look at what they're doing and make sure they're complying.
Yeah, so if you pick up the phone and call and the number is not on the DNC list, then you can do that. If the number is on the DNC list, that is still a violation, even if you're calling using your phone, unless you have express invitation or permission. And then to your point, any enterprise that's doing any kind of outbounding at scale, unless you're using one of these specially built systems like SafeSelect, then you definitely now have to be taking a look at what's happening because the rules around lead generation, first party and third party. I want to emphasize that, right? We're talking about third party a lot here, but the rules change for first party too. These revisions have taken place. You really got to be looking at what you're doing.
Eric, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Just to separate Adam's 200 right in the middle. So you talk about violations here. In your opinion, like how successful do you think the FCC is going to be when it comes to policing this? And do you think there's going to be marketers and advertisers out there who are just like, come get me, and they just don't really change what they're doing and they're willing to pay the occasional fine?
Well, no one's paying an occasional fine. I mean, you're talking about massive exposure and getting shut down. But the FCC is not your concern. Understand, the FCC is not the one enforcing the statute. It's the plaintiff's bar that's enforcing the statute.
This is for consumers who are going to sue, Josh. They're going to go get a lawyer because they got my phone just rang and I call the lawyer and I sue the person on the other line because they violated these rules. The FCC just makes the rules and allow lawyers to go eat because of it.
That's exactly right. And remember, the FCC made this rule in response to something called the NCLC. The NCLC gets millions of dollars a year from the plaintiff's bar, right? And unsurprisingly goes into the FCC and says, change the rules so the plaintiff's bar can make more money, bringing more lawsuits. And that's exactly what just happened. So, if you are somebody that thinks, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, come and get me, they're going to come and get you. I'm telling you, man, like these are really choppy waters. This is not, you can't be a Wild West bucko out here. They will come guns blazing. And I'll say this, you don't just get to shut your business down either, right? This is not how it works. You get personally sued, all right? If you are the person that runs this business, it doesn't matter if you're an LLC. There's no corporate form protection in TCPA world. You get individually sued, and you'll get put into individual bankruptcy. And then these guys are such scumbags; they'll find it non-dischargeable in bankruptcy, and you're just going to be stuck with this paying back a judgment of $1 billion over the next 20 years with your checks getting garnished. It's crazy. It's nuts.
Eric, are the rumors true that you are now the Affiliate Marketing Show's official legal analyst? That's what all the people are saying online right now.
Is that what they're saying? saying? I mean,
I think that's what he committed to.
Like, do I need to start saying, and today we're bringing back in our legal analyst?
Look, the Affiliate Marketing Show is a fantastic program, and I think you guys do just a great job keeping people informed. I would be honored to be your official legal analyst, if you'd like me to be.
All right,
well, we're sending him swag.
Yeah, we got to get you some swag, bro. 100%. Well, Eric, third time's a charm, man. I have a feeling this isn't the last time we're going to see you. Thanks again for joining us. For myself, Josh from OfferVault, Mr. Paper Call Adam Young, the industry legend Harrison Gevirtz, and the czar Eric Troutman, founder of Troutman Amin LLP, as well as TCPAworld.com and the organization Reach. Let's make that paper. Let's make that dough. This was the Affiliate Marketing Show. We will see you next time.
Marketing.